Amen. Hey, turn that speaker mic on. Turn both of them on because Rich is going to use the other one. Man, good morning. Certainly, it is a blessing to be assembled once again here in the house of the Lord with another opportunity to study a portion of His holy and divine word. And as always, is indeed our prayer that hopefully something is said this morning that you find to be beneficial and thereby be able to apply it to your life, be a better Christian and a better person in the future. We have another interesting lesson this morning, I believe, and so we certainly want to get your involvement more in this lesson, but again, our series is on the go statement of Jesus. If you have questions or comments, I'm going to ask you once again to raise your hand, and then I'm going to get Brother Graham to come around, if you will, with the microphone so that we might be able to hear your comments on the YouTube. So lesson 1, you remember, so it'd be good if you can hold them to a minimum since we are online and we are live. So in lesson 1, we learned that there was a command, or we was commanded to do what? To go, right? And that was one of the things that we got from lesson 1. Lesson 2, we found that we were instructed to follow Jesus, right? Right. So we were instructed. In lesson 3, today's lesson would help us describe what sets us apart from others. What sets us apart from others. So now Jesus says we are expected to go further, or go further than others, or go further than expected. So we are to go further than expected. Our key verse today, if you will, is whoever forces you to go 1 mile, go with him 2. Mm-hmm. And that's Matthew, you find that, I think that's found by verses 41 in the 5th chapter of Matthew. Our lesson text is found verses 21, at least the author uses verses 21 through verses 48. But we know that the 5th chapter of Matthew is considered what? The Sermon on the Mount, right? This is when Jesus sat down on a mount and he began to teach many and began to give them, provide information. In fact, we find that it's most often we find what's called the Beatitudes, where Jesus explains what kind of human life is blessed by God. So he begins out by stating several things. I think it's like 12 or so of them where he says blessed. One of them I recall is blessed those that are pure in heart, right? And before I really forgot to share this with you, though. So we certainly want to remember those of our number that are sick and shut in, and those that are, and the brother has prayed for that, and those that are mourning the loss of their loved ones. And we certainly want to keep the Dunn family in our prayers this morning at the loss of Sister Kathy's Dunn son. So let's pray for them. And then we have several of our members that are going through various operations and procedures, and we want to remember them. Coming to mind right off the top of my head is Sister Dansby. I understand she's doing better and making improvement. We want to continue to pray for her. Brother Blanton, I believe, had a procedure or operation, and so we want to pray for him and his family. And then I think Brother Snow had some things that was being looked at and taken care of. So we got a number of people.
Rambo.
And Brother Rambo, okay? So we want to remember all those family in our prayers and continue to pray for them. And the opportunity presents itself throughout the week where you might be able to call them or go by and see. I'm certain they would appreciate any words of encouragement that you may have. But then back to our lesson, if you will. So Jesus explained what kind of human life is blessed by God. And as we read those things, and many times I may be getting a little bit ahead of myself, we'll find that God expects things different than man. So God is not like man. And so it's a challenge for us, if you will, when we talk about the expectations, because it goes against a lot of things that we are at odds with. For an example, as we just stated up there, it says to go further than expected. That doesn't come natural to us, right? In fact, we are inclined to do what? To do least as possible, and sometimes even do less, right? We don't see the value, we don't appreciate the value of going beyond or doing more. And we'll get more into it here in a little bit, but I want to get you in this lesson if I can. So now, if you will, somebody read for us here verses 21, starting at verses 21. We're going to read a few of the scriptures. I didn't go through all 48 of them, but I wanted to read a few of the scriptures because I wanted to get you involved in the lesson. Starting at verses 21.
And whoever murders shall be guilty before the court. But I say to you that everyone who continues to be angry with his brother or harbors malice against him shall be guilty before the court. And whoever speaks contemptuously or insultingly to his brother, Raka, you empty-headed idiot, shall be guilty before the Supreme Court, the Sanhedrin, and whoever says you fool shall be in danger of fiery hell. So if you are presenting your offering at the altar, and while there you remember that your brother has something such as a grievance or legitimate complaint against you, leave your offering there at the altar and go. First make peace with your brother, and then come and present your offering. Come to terms quickly at the earliest opportunity with your opponent at law, while you are with him on the way to court, so that your opponent does not hand you over to the judge, and the judge to the guard, and you are thrown into prison. Assure you, and most solemnly say to you, you will not come out of there until you have paid the last cent.
Thank you. So now let's just look at these just for a minute. And there are many other things here that Jesus talks about, and we can talk about them, but I didn't put them all up here on the slide, if you will. But let's just look at these and look, beginning specifically here, looking at what Jesus says to us about committing murder. And so what Jesus did, he took many common known practices back then, right? That was held and understood by all, but Jesus taking it to another level, if you will. He said that you talk about and you know, and that's right, we shouldn't commit murder, right? He said, but now I'm talking about when you upset with your brother, how you talk to and how you treat your brother. He's saying that there are some consequences for your actions. Now, Jesus and so let me back up just a little bit, if you will, give you a little background. Jesus had watched the people around him and had a good understanding of their practices and their customs. And he saw how we interacted, or the people at that time interacted with one another. And one of the most notable things was that they worked very hard. Many of those that confessed to be God's following people worked very hard in being masters of knowing the law. But that's all they really understood. They knew the letter of the law, but their hearts was not in it. Let me say that again, because I don't know if you really appreciate what I said. They knew the letter of the law, but their hearts were not in it. In fact, there's a scripture in the Bible that tells us that even the devil knows what? The scriptures, and he does what? Tremble. Many of us, we know the words of God, and it has what? No effect on us, right? And so Jesus is talking about now, so what he wanted them to understand, I'm needing you to what? I'm needing you to understand what it is God is looking for in you. I need you to understand the value of these things. So there's a value in how we care and we think about one another. And so he's saying to it, and so I read this one because I was thinking about this and this one, because this is one that's so easily hidden from others. In other words, how we feel about one another. And that's why I chose to use this one, because, and I was thinking, how often, and notice here he ends where he says, if you have an ought with your brother, he says, leave your offering there before the altar and go and be reconciled with your brother. Have we ever done that? Have you ever had a concern or a thought that somebody had a problem with you? Not that you may have had a problem with them, but they had a problem with you. Even sit up in church during worship service and thinking, so-and-so got an issue with me. Yet we went ahead with our worship service. We thought nothing of it. Well, let me go back. Let me stop saying we. I know I have. Let me put it that way. I don't know if you ever done that, but I have. I didn't follow Jesus' example here. I'm saying, okay, leave my offering and then going to my brother and getting it straight and getting it cleared up. In fact, what does it take for us to do that? You have to have what? A humble heart. What else? What else you got to be willing to do? Put yourself on the back burner, and you got to be willing to take what? A risk. You got to be willing to take a risk. You know, we oftentimes don't want to be embarrassed. And okay, so let's say, for an example, and I'm going to use somebody that I know that I'm in good, at least I think that I'm in good shape with right now. I'm going to use Brother Dan. All right? So let's say I think that Brother Dansby has got something going on and that he's not treating me the way that he normally would, or he not treating me the way I think I ought to be treated. Do I stop whatever it is I'm doing and go to Brother Dansby and say, Brother Dansby, I want to know if you got a problem with me, and let us discuss that out? Do we ever do that? Or is it, y'all looking at me, I'm assuming then that we're always in good shape with one another. We never have any different thoughts or concerns about our relationship. Brother Graham, if you don't mind. We never have any disagreements amongst one another. We must be getting together. We must be getting along really well.
I think we probably prefer to look the other way on some of these things. We prefer to just hide our head in the sand and say, well, I know how he'll react if I say anything. I know one instance that we had, not here, we had a brother who had a disagreement. We had made a decision on something. He wasn't there. And we said, we've already made a decision on that. And so he decided to leave. He said, I'm going home. I'm not going to worship this morning. I'm going home. Y'all can, and had a few choice words. And then he writes an email, long email, saying that we were wrong in worshiping because I sent him back, I said, we didn't have a problem with you. You had a problem with us. We had already made a decision on something. You left we explained to you what we did, how we did it. You didn't have, there was nothing to oblivious about. I mean, nothing that you should have misconstrued, and you chose to leave because we made a decision. And then he accused us. I said, no, well, you did the right thing, you left. You didn't worship. But we had no problem at all. And so sometimes what we think about somebody, and we'll let it go with that. You know, I know Brother Brown, he's going to react this way or whatever, and so I'm not going to talk to him about it. I'll just go on and, you know, I'll choose to ignore it this time, and we go on, but I harbor this thing against you.
That's right. And so often, and the reason I'm saying is I know we have issues with that because it's a rise at times when we least suspect it, in that when we're meeting together on other situations, sometimes some people blow up. And they blow up about, and you saying, wait a minute, why are you blowing up about this or that? It ain't about this or that. It's about something else that happened that we hadn't got over, right, or getting through with. Brother Wilson?
Jesus said, how can you love God whom you have not seen if you hate your brother who you see every day? And this is really what Christ is getting at here. Because we some kind of way we think we can play around things without addressing the real issue. So he says, you said do no murder. But see, I tell you, if you got a problem with your brother, you've murdered him already anyway, because your relationship has been severed. So in your mind, in your heart, you have basically murdered your brother. You say, I ain't got nothing else to do with him. So you've killed him. And that's the way Christ looks at it. So he's concerned about our relationships. In the same way he does in all of his illustrations, Christ is really getting to the root of the matter, which is really our hearts. Mm-hmm. And so the transformation of the heart has to take place, and we have to be genuine. Just like you say, we don't really do that because we're not really concerned, so to speak, with our relationship. But Christ is telling us that we should be. He's saying, if you don't love your brother, you don't love me. And because we're supposed to be transformed, we're supposed to be like him. And Christ gave his life for us, even though we were enemies. So that's the thing that we really have to see, and we really have to stop playing games.
That's right. And I share this with you as well. Is I was talking, Marion and I was talking about this. You know, having a relationship with someone else or being friends with someone else, it's hard work. That's hard work. I mean, just think, it's one of the things we are challenged with is communication. And what has made it even worse, and the reason I said that, we and her talk about this, we've just recently talked about some of this, is because sometimes when we try to communicate with others that we think are our friends, and some even with our family. And oftentimes now people, they don't really want to talk, they want to text. And so we text. And we ask what we think are clear, specific, concise questions. And we get these vague answers. And then we make a response. And then we get this answer still not answering the thing. And so we say, well, wait a minute, I'm just tired. So we give up. And the reason I say that is that in our Christian life, when we try to have relationships and we try to build those things that Christ has asked us to do in terms of us being relationships, I think sometimes we just get tired and we just give up. So it's easier, as Kevin said, to say, you know what? You don't matter. It's easy. When you don't matter, then I don't have to be concerned. I don't have to care. I don't have to work at this thing. And Christ is saying, no, you that's precisely what I'm trying to get you. This is what these laws was for, to precisely get you there, to make you do the work. And not only that, because I want you to see how difficult it is, because I want you to see how much work God is putting in to have a relationship with us. I want you to see just how hard it is. God is working very hard at having a good relationship with us. But guess what? Our sin keeps getting in the way. And so this is what we have. So this is why he's saying that, and we're going to move on, and I appreciate the comments. So there was a concept, or this is known as the concept of the second mile statement. Jesus called his followers to do it to a deeper commitment. In fact, if you study your book, you find that there was a Roman law which stated that if a soldier was to walk up, and no matter what you were doing, and was to put down his pack at your feet, you had to stop doing whatever it is that you were doing. Pick it up and take it for a mile. And so they knew that law, or they knew that custom, and they would do that. But Jesus said, I'm asking you to do more than that. You're required to carry it a mile, but I want you to carry it 2. Wait a minute. Let's look again. Let's slow down, if you will, with the lesson and try to just visualize it in our mind. And just think about it in today's context, in today's term. If you were doing something and somebody came and put down their packet, or they asked you to do something, what is your immediate response? Is it to stop doing what you were doing and to do what they want you to do? You know, I'm just going to share some things with you here, and I try to use me because I don't want you to get upset, whatever. But you know, just here recently, when we look at it, and I just say to you earnestly about a number of the people that are having different operation procedures, people doing this, that, and the other, and I have the greatest intent, and I want to do things. I want to go and see them. I want to do this, and I do pray for them. But you know, I find myself saying, I'm too busy to go. I got other things I'm doing. Y'all with me on this? I don't know if y'all hear what I'm saying. To stop doing what I'm doing, right? And to put others before me. That's not something that's easy. I can sit here and run through this scripture with you all. I can sit here and simply just do things, but that's not something easily put into practice. Because self is always paramount to us. What I have to do or what I'm doing is always more important. So I can't even imagine. I sit here and I think about it. I'm trying to imagine those young men who were working in the field, probably doing some work in the field that they didn't want to do to begin with. And if you're like me, when I'm doing something I don't want to do, the best thing for me to do is go ahead and do it and get through with it. And so I'm here working in the field, sweat, hot in the middle of the day, and then and out of nowhere, here comes this soldier, and he drops his pack down. He looked at me. I can see me want to look at him. I can see me want to tell him, you need to pick that up and go on where you're going. Huh? And I say that because in a lot of ways, that's what we do in today's environment. People are looking for us. When we banish the banner of Christian, people are looking at us. My first response is, well, why don't they call the preacher? Not your response? Where are the deacons? Ain't that their job? Those are my responses. I don't know what your responses is. Why I got to get up? Why I got to stop doing what I'm doing? Jesus says because the pack has been put at your feet. It's not saying that everybody else is excluded, but he's talking about when the pack is laid at your feet. Do you go the mile? And he says, I'm not only asking you to go the mile, but I'm asking you to go what? The second mile. But you know, and if you really stop and take time to think about this, if you will, this concept of the second mile, it is so beneficial because it does so many things. In fact, I would tell you, most of the things that helped me to exceed on the job was when I was willing to go beyond what was expected. It was only those things that helped me. It wasn't because I did my job. That's what I was paid to do. I have employees come to me, and it says clearly, and when I was working, it says clearly in our employee handbook that you expect it. While we understand that there may be things, emergencies, that prevent you from coming to work, such as illness and sicknesses, and the company talks about that, and they do something like that. But then it says, but as an employee, you are expected to be at work every day. It spells it out. And then it says in there that you also, because of the job we had, you were expected to work overtime. It says it in there. And inevitably, when I'm sitting down talking with an employee doing their performance review, one of the things they bring up is, I was at work every day. Well, good. And they would get mad. You don't think that was, no, that's what you expected to do. Okay, let me bring it back. Maybe you can understand this. So as Christians, one of the things that we want to say to Christ when we get there, I was at church every Sunday. Well, good. Well, what else did you do? That's what was expected of you. If you remember last week's lesson, we talked about the fact that we talked about what? Our duty, right? We talked about you being what? Us being what? Undeserving. Y'all can't forget. Y'all got to, these lessons, you got to remember this stuff. Being undeserving, right? And so we need to understand that as undeserving servants of our Lord and Savior, that we should be looking to go beyond what's expected. So Jesus calls us, and I'm going to say this here too, it's a good opportunity to go ahead and interject this. We need to also understand, if you will, that well, I'm going to be getting ahead of myself. I'm going to hold that thought. So Jesus, or God, is looking for a wholehearted righteousness. That's what he's looking for from us. He doesn't want any half-heartedness from us. He don't want anybody that's doing things just because. Brother Wilson?
Yeah, I was going to say, too, Christ is really, see, we get to looking at the wrong thing, and really, without knowing it, the world becomes our leader, so to speak. We look at the world, and we think we're following Christ, but we're really following the world. But if we followed Christ, we would go the extra mile because he went the extra mile. See, so it's all part of our transformation process, and Christ really, by bringing these things out, he's really teaching us not to look at and not to follow the example of the world, which is what we have a natural tendency to do. But that's what breaks it when we let Christ be our example and we see how he went the extra mile for us. That's supposed to be the motivation for us to defy the example that the world sets down and follow Christ. And just like you say, the world notices it. Just like that you were noticed on your job, the same way the world notices when we go the extra mile like Christ did.
That's right. And so when we identify ourselves as to who we are. Now, I love the fact that the author, using a good example, and if you hadn't read the opening part of the workout that the author said, it's very interesting, and I would suggest that you read it. But to just summarize it, he talks about a young man who's a police officer, and he finds himself in the face of many ordeals at one time. And it becomes so overwhelming that he just says, well, I just take off my uniform and blend in with the crowd. And so that's why our challenge is that sometimes life becomes so overwhelming, as Kevin using the world to say, in terms of the things that the world are doing that are so at odds with what we do as supposed to do as Christians, that many times we do what? We just blend in. And in essence, we are taking off our uniform. And so look at what Jesus said here in the 5th chapter in verses 20. He says, and this is Matthew's again, he says, for I say unto you that unless your righteousness far surpasses that of the scribes and Pharisees, you will not enter into the kingdom of heaven. So let's think about what was the Pharisees and scribes like. So it ain't enough to know the Bible, right? You can know the Bible, but if you don't practice what it is that you're supposedly knowledge of, in fact, you can make an argument that they knew what the letter says, but they really didn't know the law. because they didn't dig any deeper. They didn't get to the heart of it. In fact, we can ask ourselves is that when we come this morning, when we come into the worship service, will we just come here and go through the worship practice? Or will we search to try to get deeper involved in worship? Whoa, y'all looking now. Huh? Will you just simply go through the motions? Huh? When the brother gets up there and he started talking about the Lord's Supper, would that really be Jesus there? Would that really be his blood to you? Or would we simply just be drinking some juice and crackers? I mean, that's really getting to the heart of what it is when you get into worship service. When you sing the song, when you pray the prayer, or you singing to Jesus, or you praying to God, or you going through the motions so somebody might see you and say, boy, that Brother Brown, he really can pray. We're going to get into it a little bit longer, in a little bit more. But he says now, you got to exceed what they doing. If you want, I want you to remember that part, underline the part. You will not enter in the kingdom of heaven unless you far past what they do. They was practicing, but anyway, we'll get to that a little bit more. So here, somebody, let's read, and we'll see a little bit more about them. So Jesus gave a description in the 23rd chapter, and I just put down verses 1 through 7. So if somebody would, let's read these scriptures, if you will. Matthew 23, verses 1 through verses 7.
Then spake Jesus to the multitude and to his disciples, saying, the scribes and the Pharisees sat in Moses' seat. All therefore, whosoever they bid you observe, that observe and do, but do not ye after their works, for they say and do not. For they bind heavy burdens on and grievous to be borne, and lay them on men's shoulders, but they themselves will not move them with one of their fingers. But all their works they do for to be seen of men. They make broad their phylacteries and enlarge the borders of their garments, and love the uppermost rooms at feast, and the chief seats in the synagogue, and greetings in the markets, and to be called of men, Rabbi, Rabbi. But be not ye called Rabbi, for one is your master, even Christ, and all ye are brethren. And call no man your father upon the earth, for one is your Father which is in heaven. Neither be ye called masters, for one is your master, even Christ. But he that is greatest among you shall be your servant, and whosoever shall exalt himself shall be abased.
That's good. Thank you, brother. I appreciate it. So now, let's just take a few minutes and look at the Pharisees and scribes. And let's look at what Jesus is trying to show or saying about them. So one of the things that we know here is that they do what? They want to be seen, right? In other words, they love to be, in other fact, they put themselves, he says, in whose seat? Moses' seat. Why did they put themselves in Moses' seat? Who was Moses? Because of the law. But not only that, but Moses was the first what? He was a judge. Wasn't he the judge? What Moses says was law. That's what Moses did. And everybody loves to be in what? Moses' leadership, but in Moses' seat. In other words, we want what? People to do what we say do, right? And if we're honest with ourselves, at one time or another, we all consider ourselves to be Moses. In fact, I'm going to say something that give you a problem, make you think about it, what I'm saying. Many of our brothers, we love to go home. And we tell our wives that we are the head of the house. I'm the king of my castle. I'm sitting in Moses' seat. But we don't go down a little bit further and see what Jesus said also when he said that the man is the head of the woman. But he said he loved her so that he did what? That he would die for his. See, we don't get down into what it's saying there. Okay, being the head sometimes ain't all what it's cut out to be, because it brings about a considerable amount of responsibility, something that we oftentimes don't want to deal with, right? Or we don't want to accept. And so what Jesus was sharing with them, he said, watch them. Because now they're going to do some right things. Or at least they're going to tell you about some right things. Because if you watch them, you will find them where? Where would they go? They be going to the synagogue. So he said, do what? He said, now, whatever they tell you to do, comply with it all. But do not as they do. Okay? So why he's telling them that? You would think that this would be someone you would follow. They should be ones of good example. Well, what was their problem? They were hypocrites. They did it to be seen, but their hearts were not in it. And so we had to ask ourselves, do we do the things that we're doing just to be seen of others? Or is our hearts truly in it? In other words, let me bring it down a little bit further. Let's say oftentimes we invite people to church. But when they come, what do they see in us? Do they see us actively involved in the worship service? Or do we bring them so they can see others and hope others can convince them of joining the church? Or are they saying, are we being the example so that they want to be with us? They want to be one of us. And then, not only that, but as which was brought out earlier, when they look at our actions when we are not in church, is it one that separates or shows that we are different or we are set apart from others? Or do they see us doing the same thing? I was talking to a guy, and he was telling me how impressed he was with the Quakers. And he said because the Quakers practice what they preach. He says that the Quakers, whenever there was slavery, he said that they was very involved in trying to help free the slaves because they didn't believe in slavery. So he likes them. I said, well, what about us? Because he lumps us in with everybody else. He said, y'all say one thing, but you do another. And I thought that was interesting, that he would have that perspective of us. And more importantly, I was thinking that that's the perspective he had of me. So honestly, I have to work very hard. Shouldn't be hard, but I have to work hard at trying to show him that I do what I say I'm going to do. And that I believe what I say I believe. And that's what we should do anyway. That should be what we do, right? And so unfortunately for us, we have there's that stigma out there against Christianity that we have to deal with. And that stigma is that we are just a bunch of hypocrites. That's why the world looks at us like they do. Because so many of us banner the name of being a Christians, but our lives don't show that. Let's go to another one. When we live here and thinking about this, now let's really get to it and think about it. Christ, he says that you've heard about you're supposed to love one another. He said, but I want you to love those that despitefully misuse you. Wait a minute. Think about that concept for a minute. It's easy for me to say that in this building, sitting up here in front of this class. But the reality of it is I struggle with people that I think, not the ones, I can't get the one that despitefully misuse me. You know they out there. I'm trying to get past the ones that I think just don't like me. I don't know, I'm talking about me. If I know that you just don't like me, it's difficult for me to get past that. It's difficult for me to sit here and say, well, you know, in spite of you not liking me, I'm still going to love you. Now, I can say that standing here with you all. And people see us say that. But the question becomes, do our actions indicate that? Let me bag it up. Like the key, let me bag it up just a little bit more, work with it. It's much easier for me to have nice and kind words for you when you have nice and kind words for me. But I have to catch myself when you say something to me that's not so nice. I know y'all don't. I know y'all got this stuff mastered that I'm talking about. But when you say something to me that's not so nice, I have to catch myself not to say something back to you. My instinct is to give back what I receive. But Christ says, I'm saying to you, that should be unnatural. What should be natural to us, what should become natural, Kevin used the word transformation. What we're transforming to is that the more you do against me, the more love I shed to you. And Jesus is not asking us to do anything that he didn't do. Because the truth of the matter is the worse we were, or the worse we were and the worse we are, God then does what? He gives us more grace. Isn't that something? He has given us more grace. Apostle Paul said the least of all was him. Was this grace given unto? And so we need to think. So that's what God is Jesus is trying to help us change our lives too. Now the question becomes, why does he want us to be like that? Why is he asking them, and consequently, or subsequently I should say, asking us to live like this? Why do you think he wants us to live like this? So he wants us to be more like him, right? He's trying to give us to take on his characteristics or his traits. And by us saying that we are Christians, we have identified ourselves as being one that what? That has taken on his traits, right? And so now it's now up to us to live like that. So now we look at this and we think about these things, but we say to ourselves, look like Jesus is asking us to do too much. Go beyond the expected. Go beyond the expected. Trying to get us to understand that it should be inherent in us to do more, to want to do more. And just think about that. If I was sitting here trying to visualize in my mind myself, especially as a little child, and thinking about my children, and thinking about what type of child that I would love to have. And I was thinking about the fact that I would love to have children that if I asked them to do one thing, they would just take it. It'd be there in them to just to go beyond that, to come back and ask me, is there anything else I want? I just think about how that would make me feel if my children was behaving that way. And then I think about what I do as a child of God. And I honestly, I sit there and I think about, and I look at my children, and especially now that they're adults, and I think, they have their own lives. And they're living their own lives in many ways. And not that they don't care about me, but they're going about their lives and doing the things that they want to do. And I ask myself, do they ever think about what is it that I want them to do? And then consequently, I turn back in myself. The reason I ask myself the question, because I consider myself to be a child of God. Am I doing what God wants me to do? Or do I go about my life every day just doing whatever it is I want to do? And then if God asks me to do something, or there's something to ask of God, that seems to be somewhat burdensome to me. Going beyond what's expected. It's just not natural for us to do. God's expectations rather than man's. So here we're looking at the fact that we oftentimes try to work on measuring up to what man expects of us. But what about God? What about God's expectations of us? Do we ever ask ourselves, are we meeting or exceeding his expectations? And you would think that would be something that we would be considering, given that we say that we want to go to heaven. But how much time do we give ourselves to look into our behavior? Because this is what it gets back to. It gets back to our behavior. Not others, but us. And here's the thing that's interesting to me as well is that for some reason or another, we are willing to do some things when we see others doing them. But what about doing them and there's nobody but you? What if I was the only one? That's what Jesus did. He was the only one. And he set the example. And then others came along later on and followed him in that example. But many of us, we're waiting on someone else. Well, I'll do it, Brother Brown, when I started seeing the preacher do it. Or I'll do it when I started seeing the deacons doing it. But I'm not going to be out there by myself. I'm not going to do it myself. Why not? That's what Jesus is calling us to do. I know this is one of those lessons that you might make y'all be quiet and y'all looking at me. I'm trying to get y'all involved in it. But I want you to see that God is expecting us to meet his expectations. We're living our lives. If we're honest with ourselves, oftentimes we're living our lives to meet man's expectations. We look at and we try to, or if you will, try to buy or clothes or buy various things to be like what? What like other men, right? To get their standards. But what about God's standards? God looks at the righteousness of our hearts. You know, sometimes we need to do, like we said this in the past, we need to have a heart checkup. We need to look at our hearts and see is our heart in the right place. You know, sometimes I might do something that may not be right towards you. But the question is, was my heart in the right place? That's one of the things that we don't measure. We don't try to measure a person's heart. And let me give you an example of what I'm trying to say. I remember Again, this is another example on the job. It's the first one to come to mind, so I apologize. I remember when I had a situation with another department because what one of my employees told the people in the other department. And so the other department was, everybody, even their supervisor and their manager over them, was upset with me. But I had no knowledge of it. And then later on, something happened that I found out they was upset with me, so I immediately went over to the other supervisor to talk to them. In fact, their manager, and he happened to be outside, to talk to them about their problem. And he said, I'm sure glad you came. When he saw me walk up, he said, I'm glad you came over. He said, I've been meaning to come see you for a few weeks now. And so I stopped in my track. So I'm astonished. And then he said, so-and-so said you said this and said that and whatever. And he said, and I'm sitting there, and I'm flabbergasted. Then he says, immediately he says, but that didn't sound like you. I said, well, you know that's not me. But yet they had been operating as if that was me. And so what I'm saying that to us is that we ought to know one another. We ought to know one another's heart. And when we see an action that doesn't line up, we ought to be willing to go to one another and say, I saw this, but that doesn't line up with who I know you are. And then sometimes we might need some encouragement because we might have fallen off the path. And somebody might need to come to me and say, I seen you do this, brother, and that's not in line with who I know you. Some of these things, somebody go out and check and see if I think I'm at Russell Road. Y'all looking at me like I'm in somewhere. Brother God.
I got a little something humorous, but it makes what you're talking about. We had a conversation on Friday, and we were talking to Brother Kidd. And I found some things out about Brother Kidd that makes me apprehensive of going fishing with him.
Okay.
Brother Kidd likes to poke the snake.
Right.
I'm not really a big fan of snakes. I can take them or leave them, but he likes to poke them. What I'm saying is, by sitting down and talking and understanding where he's coming from, who he is, that gives me some more information in my relationship and building my relationship with him. And so I think sometimes what we do is we try to build a relationship, and you've already alluded to it, and we're trying to build a relationship on a Sunday morning when in actuality, our Sunday morning is to God. It's not necessarily to try to build a relationship, because I'm not saying it can't happen at another time, but what I'm saying is sometimes we try to do everything on one day, thinking that if I can get this all done on one day, then the rest of the days it's for me. And so and you said it again. It's work. A relationship is work. You can't just work on it like one day. It's every day. You got to work. You got to work at this. And I think sometimes we don't want to put the time in going, like you said, that second mile to be able to do it. The first mile, we can speak and be nice and cordial to one another. That's that first part. But what about that second part when, maybe you do something that I don't necessarily agree with or like, or I think that, will I go the second mile and approach you and ask the question, is there something wrong?
And very, very true. And one of the things that I tell you all the time, I'm looking at stuff and I'm reading some things. And one thing is I've been studying a little bit is on the brain and some other things. But our brain is adapted to, because it takes so much information in, it's adapted to making decisions on incomplete information. It fills in the blank. One of the things you can do to do that is you can read some things. If you take their studies that they'll show you how you can read some things, and you read words into there that's not really there. So, what that is so it leads us to making a lot of assumptions. We're making a lot of assumptions by things. And sometimes those assumptions are inaccurate. Well, in a lot of them, and most times they're inaccurate. It is because we are not seeking to get complete information. You have your hand up, Brother Anthony?
Yeah, sometimes we don't realize somebody's got something against us. So we can't do nothing about it. So that's why we need to get with each other. I remember some assumptions. A good example, some years ago, Doris used to give away Victoria's Secrets and stuff like Kathy does. Okay, she gave this to one sister, and she took it the wrong way and was upset for 2 or 3 years until somebody told Doris what happened. She gave her that package, and she assumed that Doris thought that she wasn't smelling well.
And that's right. And that's because incomplete information, right? And so what it does is it means that we have to do what? We have to take some time to ask questions and to do some what? More investigating before we can make a what? Final decision. And that all that takes time and effort. And the brain makes it seem so easy. Let me tell you something else. You need to think about one of the things I read. Is your brain or your mind is always listening. It's always listening to you. And so when you are talking things, whether they be negative or positive, it hears that. And did you not know that the reason some people walk around like the sky is falling all the time is because they speak in their mind a lot of negative things. And so everything they see from that slant. No matter how good it is, no matter how great things are, the first thing they think is something is finna happen. No matter how much God has blessed them, they say, well, something is finna happen. Because why? They speaking those things. And conversely, those who are speaking positive things, no matter what happens, no matter how bad things get, they always say there's a silver lining. And that's what we as Christians should be. We should be that silver lining. No matter how bad things get, we ought to be that silver lining. Somebody ought to say, no matter what, we sing the song and we talk about there's no friend like Jesus. But we ought to be that friend. I know I got one friend. And we all going to say Jesus. But the reality of it is, from a physical standpoint, Jesus is not here. Spiritually, I know he's here. But Jesus ain't here. So who is that friend? It ought to be me, right? I ought to be that one friend. I got a hand in the back. So we ought to be there. And that's the way we should be. Oh, I'm finna run over time. Let me make her come in. I done lost track of time, y'all.
Yeah, I just wanted to make a comment. My niece is a member of the church, but she doesn't worship anywhere. And one day she was telling me when she was younger, she had 3 children. She had gone through a very bad divorce, and she was raising those 3 children by herself, working hard. And she decided to go to worship one Sunday. She went to a congregation, a large congregation, and the place was packed. There was not hardly any place to sit. So she took her small children and walked up front, found a place, and sat down. A woman walked up to her and said, "You have to move. My husband is going to be passing the collection plate around. You have to move." Well, she didn't. She sat there. But she said when she left, and she's soft-spoken, sweet, kind, and she has this little southern accent. And she told me, she said, when I left, I had a sour taste in my mouth. And I think when I have come here, I call it church manners. we communicate as people, verbally and non-verbally. I'm sure not everybody in that congregation would have acted that way, but what I like about coming here is that people don't just communicate verbally with me in a certain way. I have people come up, hug me, shake my hand, make me feel welcome. And I think when we talk about Jesus' commandment to go into the world and teach people the gospel, sometimes we think it's the preacher's responsibility to do that. But we're commanded in the New Testament to bear fruit. I believe that fruit is another person's, the fact that you in some way affect another individual and you lead them to Christ. And I think it's just so important that we be able to do that and to encourage one another. And I just want to compliment this congregation.
Thank you. And so that is a very good compliment on the congregation in a way in which what? We all behave here. And that's the way we should be. And that's the way we should do. And I'm encouraging you to continue to do that. But Jesus says he's asking us to go the second mile. Right? And so he's saying we need to get deeper than just that. We need to go far than just that. We need, as she said also, is we need to take that outside of here. And we're gonna one other quick comment, we're gonna close it because we over our time. Go ahead, Kevin.
Like you're saying, see, if we don't go the second mile, the world can't see Christ. Goes back to your example about, where's, we saying that my friend is Jesus, but Christ is supposed to be living in us. See, but if we don't go the second mile, nobody knows Christ is living in us. So therefore that's why we don't consider each other the friend. But yeah, our brothers and sisters ought to be our friend. They ought to be our closest friend because Christ is living in us. So that's how we say I have a friend in Jesus. Why? Because Jesus lives in Mary. So I can go to Mary just like I go to Jesus because Jesus is in Mary. So that's how we have this friend in Jesus. It's our fellowship one with another as we all have this fellowship in Christ. But without the extra mile, if we only move as far as the world moves, all the people see is the world. We have to go the second mile so that the world can see that, hey, there's something different. And when they look at what's different, they see Christ.
Amen. And we'll close with this. So don't everybody run up at me at one time and tell me everything that's wrong with me. All right. Some of y'all give it a little bit of time. Y'all kind of get in line up, and then I'll try to work on some of those things, okay? But seriously, as Kevin has said, we need to be that example. People need to see Christ in us. And the only way that's done is when we start to making a deeper commitment in what we're saying.